Cool. Here we are. We are out of the cell, and now we get to talk about this cute little mousey. So this is Unit 7, Natural Selection, Topic 1, 2, and 3. Here's a quote from Darwin. Let's read through it. It may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing. Throughout the world, every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insatiably working, whenever and wherever the opportunity offers, at the improvement of each organic being in relation to its organic and inorganic conditions of life. We see nothing of these slow changes in progress until the hand of time has marked the long lapse of ages, and then so imperfect is our view into long past geological ages that we only see that the form of life are now different from what they formerly were. That was Charles Darwin on The Origin of Species. Don't try to read the book. It's like 800 pages and it's all like that. Essentially, what he's saying here is that some people might say that natural selection's going on all the time, but we never really see it, right? We don't see these changes until many generations have passed and we can compare one to the next. Cool. So, Darwin, he's one of my heroes. He was an English dude, an English naturalist. We would call that more of like an ecologist nowadays. And he worked most of his work was down over here in the Galapagos. If you guys have a chance, you can still go to the Galapagos. Some of the tortoises, I believe, that Darwin studied are still there. So let's talk about his research. He was interested in biogeography. So that is the geographic distribution of species, where things live and how they adapt to their environments. So Darwin came up with a hypothesis. So organisms left South America and colonized in the Galapagos Islands where they diversified and gave rise to a new species. So he was comparing the birds in South America with the birds on the Galapagos, which is, we'll talk about island biogeography, because that species was sort of isolated from its larger population on the mainland. They diversified, they adapted to their own environment. He was specifically interested in finches, Darwin's finches. So you can see a bunch of finches over here, and particularly the shape of their beaks. We'll talk a little bit more about this too, but these are all like the same species of finches, but you can see they all have very different beaks, and each different beak is corresponds to a type of plant that they eat. So we'll get into it. We're going to skip over this true or false because I want to do it in class. Cool. So, evolution. During his studies, Darwin proposed this idea of descent with modification. This is kind of what we think of evolution now. This is one of the reasons why Darwin's like one of my favorite people in the world. So I'm sure we've seen this before. This is Tree of Life, right? I have a poster of it in the classroom. And as Darwin was coming up with this theory, which was revolutionary at the time, no one knew what was going on. He made this in his journal, and then he wrote next to it, I think. I love that about Darwin. I love that because he was unsure of his studies too, right? Like sometimes when we're trying to figure stuff out in science, we become very unsure about our observations or our predictions, or you're like, oh, I don't really know. Darwin felt the same way, right? So it's all right to feel that way. This is sort of an addition for me. This is my favorite quote. This is also found directly from Darwin's journals. It says down here, but I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everything, everybody and everything, right? Darwin had hard days. We think about Darwin as like this ethereal, like, oh my God, big biologist and whatever, but he had no idea what he was doing any more than I had any idea what I'm doing, or you have any idea what you're doing. We're all just trying to figure out life. So remember that. Great. Evolution is now defined as the change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. Darwin called it descent with modification. So heritable traits change from generation to generation. To explain this pattern of descent with modification, he observed, Darwin proposed this idea of natural selection. So descent with modification is like the outcome. Natural selection is what brings us there. Boom. Stop here to take notes. I'm sorry, I haven't been doing that. And when we say descent with modification, that's like descendants. So each descendant is now modified for its environment. All right, natural selection. So this is a process in which individuals have certain traits tend to survive and reproduce at higher rates than individuals because of those traits, right? So this isn't survival of the fittest. This is just the traits that you have are better for the environment. You're not going to get picked off by a predator. You can pass on your genes, survive and reproduce. It acts on phenotypic variations in the population. So remember, it's your phenotype. It's what you're expressing outwardly. Genotypes, yeah, of course, like the genotype has to change in order for the phenotype to change. But in Darwin's time, he knew nothing about genetics. So it acts on the phenotypic variations in a population. Some phenotypes will increase or decrease an organism's fitness. We talk about evolution in natural selection in terms of fitness. This is your just ability to survive and reproduce. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just you've got the right stuff to live in the environment that you live in. Measured by reproductive success, so however many babies someone has, not someone, we're talking strictly animals here. Humans don't really fall into this kind of category. We've sort of bucked natural selection. So however many babies an organism has is its reproductive success. That's how we determine its fitness. And then environments can change. We'll talk about different stressors on environments, right? And this causes selective pressures in the population. So floods, right? Earthquakes, fires, that can change the composition of a species just purely based on chance. Awesome. Pause here if you got to take notes. So Darwin made two observations that really kind of made this theory of natural selection come to life. The first is that traits are heritable. So you pass them down, and more offspring are produced than can survive. This is a big one. More offspring are produced than can survive. We'll get into why later. So traits are heritable. Characteristics can be passed from parent to offspring, and adaptations can be passed as well. So they're inherited characteristics of organisms that enhance their survival and reproduction. So they're adapting to their environment. For example, the ears of the fox here are very large, both so that they can hear their prey, but also to cool down, right? That's a lot of surface area, and they live in the desert. So the ears got real big, a lot of surface area able to cool down. I'm sorry, stay here if you need notes. Look at the eyelashes on this guy. Ooh. Teak. He's smiley. All right, here we go. More offspring are produced than can survive. So this leads to competition for limited resources, which results in differential survival. Okay, the traits that lead to survival will accumulate in the population, and populations evolve, not individuals. So essentially what this means is in the wild, species will have more offspring than can survive because they're betting on some of them dying. Some of them getting picked off by predators. The young in many species are highly susceptible to predation. But essentially what this is it leads to competition for resources and results in differential survival. So some survive, some don't. and the traits that lead to survival will accumulate in the population, right? So like you have a bunch of kids or you have a bunch of babies, you're like a mouse, right? And you have a bunch of babies and you're in the desert, and some of the babies come out with white fur and some of them come out with tan fur. The white fur ones are going to be picked off pretty quickly, and the tan fur ones will then survive and pass on those favorable traits. Remember, we're talking whole populations and not individuals. So that's what we mean when we say accumulate in the population. All right, artificial selection. So scientists figured this out, and now we can induce it in other animals. We're going to be talking, if Unit 5 was about cats, Unit 7 is about dogs. At the time, Darwin was worried about other scientists supporting his work. Yet Darwin wasn't really accepted favorably in the scientific community, in the community at large, because it was still very much a religious community, but even in the science community. So he compelled them to compare natural selection to artificial selection. So artificial selection is the selective breeding of domesticated plants and animals to encourage the occurrence of desirable traits. This is like, I need a dog that can pull a sled in the winter hundreds of miles and never get cold, right? So now we have huskies. Artificial selection, so selective breeding of things. We did this a little bit with the plants, right? And Mendel did this a little bit with pea plants. He artificially selected traits and mated them together to create something that, he knew. Pause here to take notes. Artificial selection is really cool, and we do it all the time. I know the debate club did a lot with bioengineered food and that sort of thing. That's all artificial selection. So let's compare them. Natural selection. Nature will select the traits that are better suited for survival and reproduction. Doesn't matter what those traits are. If you don't have them, you die. If you do have them, great. That's nature for you. Artificial selection. Humans select the desirable traits. So, those poor flat-nosed dogs, right? That was considered fashionable, so we bred them to have flatter and flatter noses. There's actually a huge uprising of dog people who are trying to de-evolve that trait. Anyway, this happens during the domestication of plants and animals. Both can lead to evolutionary change. Both can lead to evolutionary change. This is the outcome is the same. Whether humans select the trait or nature selects the trait, the outcome is the same. Natural selection occurs in nature without the influence of humans, but they can both cause this change in a population. That's how we get the different species of dogs. Pause here to take notes. Boom. Okay, practice problem. Yes, you are going to do this. A population of pacas, a nocturnal rodent, live in South America. Their diet consists of leaves, flowers, and fruits that have fallen from taller trees. A recent fire has wiped out much of the food that the pacas eat. This has caused the pacas to lose body mass. Due to the lack of food, subsequent generations of pacas are thinner than preceding generations. Identify this as an example of descent with modification and justify your response. Pause here. Pause here for your answers. And I can't wait to see them. That's it. That's the end of the slideshow. 14 minutes.